I've been teaching Augustine's great magnum opus, The City of God, this summer, meeting with students every 2 weeks, and we've been covering 2 books in each week and slowly tracking and tracing Augustine's understanding of the city of God, the complex nature of that, and the city of man, and what happens when the two collide, and can they work together under certain conditions. This particular presentation, I want to look at the Constantinian Fall thesis and Augustine's City of God. What is the Constantinian Fall thesis? The argument unfolds in this way. There was early Christianity. The pure fire of faith was worked out as you look at it in the epistles of Paul, you look at it in the book of Acts and Pentecost. Christians were very much alive and on fire, following the example of Christ, suffering for following the example of Christ. Churches were being planted in Palestine, around the Mediterranean, reaching Rome, eventually going to India and Europe. And so there was an intense aliveness in the early Christian community, which became a model for many who saw the Bible as the source of the real font of Christianity. And anything after the first, second generation of Christianity, there was a definite and decided weakening of the faiths. So the white heat that we find in the biblical tradition recorded by Luke in Acts and Paul's letters, many hold as the pure form of Christianity. Yes, there were imperfections, hence Paul's letters, but there was very much an aliveness, an integrity, a depth, a willingness to die for the faith, a martyrdom. By the time the first, second, third generation, the post-apostolic, yes, the fire was there, but it was not as intense. There was a thinning out of the faith. There was compromises taking place. And as the centuries went on, and as Christianity formally became the official religion of the waning Roman Empire under Constantine in the 4th century, so the argument goes is that Christianity fell from the heights of its purity of the apostolic era and of Christ and the spreading of churches, increasingly thinned out, weakened, compromised. People became Christians for the sake of social advancement. They increasingly genuflected to power for the sake of fitting into the Roman Empire. And so there was, in that sense, a fall from the heights of the richness of early Christianity. And this could be defined at the formal and final level when the Emperor Constantine made Christianity the official religion of the late Roman Empire. And this is an argument which is very popular amongst certain Protestant groups of the 16th century. It has continued amongst many other Protestant groups, free church groups, and it's almost a legend or a myth in the way many people understand Christian history. The dilemma of that is twofold. One, if you think Christianity was only at its truest and purest in the New Testament, then why would you even care to study church history? Because that's just a story of fall. It's a story increasingly of thinning out, of weakening, of compromising. So why study the saints of the past? Because after all, they were not of the same integrity. They did not have the same authenticity as the early disciples and apostles who were close to Christ. And so that's one of the deficits of this particular, the Constantinian Fall. The second thing is it's just dishonest history. And I just want to briefly touch on St. Augustine's City of God in that way. So by the 4th century, as I mentioned, Constantine saw himself as a Christian emperor. He made Christianity the official religion of the late antique empire. And the Constantinian Fall thesis argues then essentially Christianity became a plaything of power. And most Christians compromised, including the church, the theologians, the main Christian thinkers of the time, and people use Eusebius's oration to Constantine to illustrate this point. And so much of then when we read Christian history, it's really a case of down, 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 and 16th century up from the grave he arose, and you get back to the apostolic church. Now, in looking at Augustine's great work, The City of God, who came about 100 years after Constantine, was his view of the church and state one in which the church was compliant. It served the interest of the emperor. that now the Christians were the official religion of the Roman Empire. They never asked any questions of how power was distributed, how emperors used the church to serve economic, imperial, military interests. Does Augustine fit into the Constantinian Fall thesis? This is the essential argument. Or if he doesn't, then this is just one rebuke in a sense, or one questioning of the Constantinian Fall thesis. Well, the city of God is essentially, Augustine in his 22 books argues, there is the city of God. Its origins come from eternity. It has a history beginning in the whole tradition of Genesis, Adam, Eve, what happened in Eden. So the seed was planted, but increasingly problems fit in. It goes from Cain and Abel, the clash between two cities, and he tends to see Cain as the beginning of the city of man, Abel as the innocent victim of Cain, as the representative of the city of God. And what Augustine does is he tracks through the 22 books these different models of the city of God and the city of man. The key thing to note here, though, that again and again Augustine will argue the city of God as it takes place in time should never absolutize the penultimate or the political, which means the church by definition, its aims are ultimate, and therefore in the penultimate world of politics and time, it should never uncritically bow before any political order that claims ultimate allegiance, similar to what Thomas More's great statement in which he talks about the king's good servant, but God's first. And so when the clash comes before ultimate allegiances and penultimate, the church of the city of God knows where its allegiances lie. So Augustine in the city of God is making it very clear that those who come from the city of God, as he tracks that through the Hebrew scriptures, through the New Testament, and then the church up to Augustine's time itself, its allegiances and alliances are not primarily to the city of man. The city of man, he argues, that is created by humans. It's often at the center of power clashes. It's often unjust. It's often imperialistic. It's often warrior-driven. And the city of God and those who are faithful to it in time must constantly question, doubt, interrogate the fabrication of politics that humans create in the name of their good. Augustine was quite willing to concede there were those within the city of man, as he calls them, that had integrity. There was the Ciceros, there were the Senecas, who were trying to articulate the good within the Republic. But even that natural theology, or what we would call common grace, was fulfilled, enriched, filled out by those who even saw a higher good than the best of common grace or natural law. And so in the city of God, to sum up, you get in Augustine's thinking, and he saw certainly the Constantinian Theodosian tradition played out certainly well over 100 years. He made it very, very clear then, with that Constantinian settlement, there was no fall in the church. In fact, the church had grown, it had matured, it was very clear about its relationship to the city that humans created, that humankind made, and that the city of God must always be suspicious of the aims, the ambitions of the city of humankind. And so he argued that essentially there would ever be a tension and a clash between the Constantinian tradition, which wanted to corral the church to serve imperial interests, and the city of God, which would constantly be in a state of suspicion of the city of humankind as they tried to create the good and the best, but often under all that rhetoric was the lust for power, the lust for wealth, the lust for empires. And so when we think of the Constantinian Fall thesis, we don't have to read very far in Augustine's City of God to understand that St. Augustine certainly would not buy into such a position, both in theory or in practice. And as the city of Rome essentially fell in 410 under the Goths, you can see Augustine challenging two cities created by humankind. One, the falling Roman Empire, which the church should never put any ultimate faith or confidence in, and to the incoming Arian Goths, which the church themselves should not put any ultimate faith in. And so in reading the City of God, it is one constant questioning of the Constantinian Fall thesis, and it offers an alternate way of understanding the church in terms of it engages politics, economic issues, military issues, from a very different perspective from which is the City of God versus the pretensions and the ambitions of the City of Man. So this position of the Constantinian Fall thesis, it holds no water whatsoever when you read Augustine or Augustine's mentor Ambrose. Ambrose challenged the City of Man under Theodosius, who was a Christian, and you could look at the clash in the West between Ambrose and Theodosius, John Chrysostom in the East, the many great Eastern fathers, who certainly never uncritically bowed before the emperor. And so those who hold the Constantinian thesis, they do so against all sorts of facts which just do not historically hold up when you read the great literature of the fathers and mothers of the time, and for that fact, many of the councils also.